Okay, well, good evening, everyone. And I'm Richard Saxon. I'm chairing tonight. And with me is Mark Kelly, who just told me I once interviewed him for a job, which rather floored me. But anyway, he survived. And Mark is here to tell us about another city tower, but one which is really very different to any of the others. I don't think it has a nickname yet, but they all have one. Mark is one of the 5 principals who formed PLP out of KPF, where everybody was until the day they moved on. And he's been working on this project for 15 years, which is before PLP was put together. And there's a long and complicated story to it, I'm sure. I'm not going to preempt anything from the material that he sent me to talk about the building, but there you see it in the middle of the screen in front of the Heron Tower, which the KPF team did. And you were presumably on that team, Mark, for the Heron?
No, I wasn't on that team, actually, Richard. But,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, well, tell it your way, and we will do Q&A at the end. And if everybody noticed that there's a Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, that's the way you can ask us questions, and I will read them out at the end to get the conversation going. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Richard. That's very kind, and thank you very much for inviting me to be here this evening. One Bishopsgate Plaza is sort of truly multi-use building, and a series of buildings. Actually, it consists of a 43-story tower that incorporates a hotel and a residential building. And there's also a lower building that fronts onto Devonshire Row that incorporates some office, retail, and restaurant uses. The scheme has been around for a long time, and a lot of sort of people have worked on it, but the hotel, as you see it at the moment, UOL are the client, and they're from Singapore. The hotel operator is Pan Pacific Hotel Group, and it's their first hotel in Europe. They are actually wholly owned by UOL. Stanhope were the development manager, and Lend-Lease were the principal contractor under a CM contract. PLP are the architects and principal designer, and WSP did most of the engineering services. Jarby Puschelberg have done the hotel interior design, and MSMR were the hotel design delivery architects, and also did all of the interiors for the residential. And then Linear were the quantity surveyors, but a very, very large team of consultants associated with the project. The project is right next door to the Heron Tower, and its gestation was actually due to the Heron Tower, because when General Bronson bought the site for the Heron Tower, he realised that actually there were some rights of light issues with the buildings to the north, and he bought the site of Stone and Staple House. It's located in the north of the City of London, right on Bishopsgate itself, and just outside the old sort of Roman gate, where Bishopsgate. It's very interesting because it has this juxtaposition with the city and the relationship with the city, but it also has this interesting relationship that has sort of developed over the recent period with Shoreditch and Spitalfields. So whilst it has a sort of Monday to Friday life associated with the city, there's also this connection with Shoreditch and Spitalfields that sort of comes alive in the evenings and at weekends. So a very interesting location for residential and hotel uses. As part of that sort of the location itself, you have this sort of old remnant of the Roman wall that sort of that runs in the east sort of west direction, and there was a whole series of sort of connectivity through the east-west direction, through Devonshire Square, onto Bishopsgate, and then into Finsbury Circus. And running in the north-south direction, you have Bishopsgate itself, the old Roman road, and you know, this connection with the city, Leadenhall Market, but then on into Spitalfield. And there are areas that have a completely sort of different character associated with them. And the site really bridges the, I think, the gap or the relationship between these two districts. The site sits within a conservation area, and that was a major sort of element in the design of the site. You know, the public benefits associated with developing and the conservation area are quite important, and the character of that conservation area is sort of is very different. So more lower-rise buildings, Victorian structures, a lot of brick, a lot of Bath stones is sort of really what one sees within the area itself. And when we inherited the sites, there were a number of existing buildings on the site, some of which made a positive contribution to the conservation area, and some of which, for structural and historic reasons, sort of had to remain in place because of infrastructure elements that I'll touch on later. But we looked at a number of different schemes that looked at incorporating some of these buildings. There were actually elements on site that were listed as almost as the demolition was sort of happening. So there was a shop front that was listed with a faience facade associated with it, and that has to be incorporated within the scheme. And there's also the buildings that front onto Devonshire Row and onto Bishopsgate as well, that sit above the district and circle line that runs out of Liverpool Street. And those buildings remain in place. And we look at actually incorporating those buildings within the new scheme. And there's a very sort of complex process associated with keeping Devonshire Chambers and actually extending it and renovating it and giving it a new lease of life. And the listed shop front as well, that I'll talk about a little bit later. So when you start to look at the constraints of the site, you don't not only have these existing elements of architectural fabric, but you also have the LVMF views, and the site is really driven by, and the massing of the taller element of the site, the 43-story tower, is driven by the Queen's Walk and the three views that are associated with Queen's Walk in front of City Hall, and also of the view from Tower Bridge as well. So they start to drive a placement of a taller building that then emerges from the Heron Tower itself and the shadow of the Heron Tower within these views. There are then some local views. So you have the views as you come out of Liverpool Street to the west, but also the views from Devonshire Square to the east. And these are among numerous local townscape views that we had to assess every single time we started looking at the way the massing would evolve. I talked a little bit about some of the infrastructure constraints, but the site has a number of tunnels that sit below it. The Devonshire Row buildings, as I said, the running tunnels for the district line actually sit below those buildings. So the crown of the tunnel actually forms the basement slab of our building. So you have all of the issues associated with working within the constraints of TfL. And whilst we were actually carrying out demolition and some elements of the construction, Crossrail was tunnelling below us at a depth of about 38 meters. But all of those elements start driving the positioning of the tall tower. There's also the fact that we started looking at the site by sort of seeing whether or not we could keep some of the existing buildings on site. and looking at whether or not the sort of placement of the tower could sit towards the eastern part of the site, which is driven by the structural constraints. There were actually a number of schemes that were looked at, but every single time we started looking at a commercial office scheme on site, we were always told that there was a viability issue associated with it. And that was really because the existing Victorian buildings and Edwardian buildings weren't very efficient in their footprint, but the tower, the smaller tower piece that was on the eastern part of the site, never really had a footprint big enough to justify a commercial use. And even if you look at that plan on the left, the footprint of Heron Tower in relation to a commercial office building in that location was never really working very well. So when we were asked to look at a completely different brief of the site that incorporated five-star hotel and residences, it suddenly started to open up the idea of a much more efficient, much more useful tower that could work with this smaller footprint. The hotel and the residential sit well together and allow for a taller 43-story tower that then interplays with uses below ground that can actually serve the hotel and allow for the creation of a public space. So you get this sort of interaction between all of these placements of elements. So if you take the site itself, we're sort of left with having to keep the buildings on Devonshire Row because of their relationship with the underground tunnels and the fact that you've got the heave if you were to remove those buildings. So those buildings remain. They're a positive contribution to the conservation area, and we look at repurposing those. There's a flank facade associated with those buildings that was actually just an internal facade. It was never meant to be exposed. So we then have to build a new facade as part of that. Plus we have to take into account the effect of Crossrail and what Crossrail means on the site and the running tunnels. And that gets you to this idea of placement of a building towards the eastern part of the site. That can have a much sort of taller footprint, but a taller shape, but a smaller footprint that then has a relationship with the Heron Tower. And that smaller footprint really works with hotel uses and residential uses. That creates a space that fronts onto Bishopsgate. And therefore you can create a new public space, and we've actually created the largest new public space on Bishopsgate that can be given over to public uses and enhance the public realm and still get a functioning building that actually sort of serves that place as well. So when you start to then look at the form, there was a lot of, you can imagine, a lot of discussion about exactly how the form works and where we had sort of setback floors associated with some of the views that I talked about earlier, and this relationship of the One Bishopsgate Plaza back to the Heron Tower itself. So, and when you start to put all of that together, one of the requirements, as well as having a five-star hotel within the city, was also to have a ballroom. And the public space and the relationship to the ballroom are completely interlinked. So you have this triple height space that sits below ground that allows you to create a new public space, not put any buildings on top of it, but it connects directly into the functional floors of the hotel. So great public space created. And then the brief at that particular point sort of changes very slightly because we moved away from what was going to be a Four Seasons hotel to UOL purchasing the site from Heron, and UOL introducing the PPHG brand onto the site. and their first hotel. So we increased the number of residential units from 120 to 160, and we went up from 200 hotel rooms to 237 hotel rooms. All of the public floors, such as the meeting rooms and the spa and the swimming pool, all-day dining, all remain at that sort of lower level. And then below ground, you have the ballroom, the pre-function space for the ballroom, and all of the back of house spaces. And then Devonshire Row itself it has a new unifying roof and an extension that fronts onto the northern space of the plaza. The ballroom, because of the number of people that require access into the ballroom, gets a new pavilion that incorporates an escalator and a lift associated with it. And then if you look from the northeastern side of the site, the 43-story tower has a series of setback floors associated with it that are driven by the townscape views and the LVMF views from Queen's Walk and Tower Bridge. And you get this sort of series of terraces and public spaces associated with one of those levels as well. So at level 26, you have the first of the setback floors, and that allows a number of the apartments at that level to end up with external terraces. And at level 34, which is the start of the sort of the penthouse floors, you have a public accessible space there that's part of the hotel, and then also a series of smaller terraces for some of the apartments at that level. And when that drops into the local townscape views from the front of Liverpool Street, you see the completed building of Devonshire Row and the new roof associated with that building, and then the 43-story tower behind, and its relationship to Heron Tower. Obviously a much smaller floor to ceiling height on this building because of the residential uses. And the view from Devonshire Square, you see the setback floors and the terraces at level 26 and the level 34 that then reveals this much finer triangular footprint for levels 34 up to 43. So for the ground floor and the public realm itself, there's a new public square that's created. The lobby for the hotel actually sort of spills out into some of that space, but it incorporates a whole series of seating elements. You have the refurbished and extended element of the building on Devonshire Row, and this new roof that incorporates restaurant uses. The Devonshire Row building has retail associated with it, the new escalator pavilion that takes you down into the basement, and then the connection through into Houndsditch. So, and the site, it's right near Liverpool Street, which is a Crossrail station. The number of people, well, at least that used to walk along Devonshire Row and along the Bishopsgate pavement, and I'm sure hopefully will do soon, it creates a whole series of new sort of connectivity and new permeability across the site that wasn't there previously. And in creating this public square, we also sort of, I think, bridge with the materials that we use, the nature of Bishopsgate, which has sort of Yorkstone. We incorporate Yorkstone paving, but in a slightly different grid and a different pattern at the floor level. And then we have benches and seating and trees and greenery associated with the space that have a sort of bronze coloration to them that then starts to make this blend to the tower itself. The entrance to the hotel and the residential units are to the south off of Houndsditch, and there's a very small taxi drop-off area associated with it, and new trees and new planting. And you come into the ground floor lobby space, and then this is a view looking into the new retail that's located on the extended Devonshire Row buildings, and then into the the functioning floors of the hotel. So you have a lobby bar, there's the all-day dining above, and there's actually a swimming pool that looks over into this space as well. The escalator pavilion is an all-glass structure, glass fins associated with it, that has a single escalator dropping down into the pre-function space and a lift as well. And it's illuminated with these fantastic sort of LED lights that these are photographs of the mock-up. And the escalator is actually, it drops down 12 meters into the pre-function space. And you can see here how the relationship of the public space works. The ballroom in this location, and then the pre-function space extends underneath the footprint of the hotel. This is a recent site photo of the escalator dropping down into that pre-function space, and the ballroom is then on the right-hand side of this image. So the ballroom itself is just short of 500 square meters. It can be divided into two and function as two separate spaces. And the pre-function space runs right the way through the plan into the footprint of the tower up above. The ballroom itself is 9 meters floor to ceiling, so a very large space. And I apologise for only construction images, but it's still under construction at the moment. So the public floors of the hotel form the base of the tower. And I said at ground floor level you have a sort of a lobby bar. There's retail and restaurant and office facilities within the Devonshire Row building. The hotel itself is located from level 6 to level 19. There's a residence lounge at level 20, and then all of the residential apartments are located in the floors above. So the ground floor of the hotel looks something like this. You enter off of Houndsditch through these two large circular sliding doors into the reception area and the lobby. You have the lifts that take you down into the basement. The residential entrance is over here, and the hotel lifts are in this location here. The lobby, bar, and lounge are located in an L shape that sort of wraps around the core of the tower and spill out into the surrounding area and the passageway that exists between the tower and the rear side of Devonshire Row. There's a staircase, a sculptural staircase that then links the upper floor, so to all-day dining and the meeting space, and down into the pre-function space for the ballroom. And these are some construction shots of that happening at the moment. All-day dining is located on the second floor, so again, you know, a very functional sort of 24-hour space that looks out over the public plaza. And then on the floor above, you have a swimming pool, spa, and gym complex. The swimming pool has an infinity edge that allows you to look over the public space, and you know, this amazing relationship between swimming pool, the public space, and Bishopsgate. It is quite it's quite an amazing space to be in, actually, even at the moment. Then the hotel floors themselves are located from level 6 to level 19. The interior design is all carried out by Jargo Puschelberg. I think one thing to note is the fact that there is this sort of slanted wall that forms the divide between the bathroom and the living space. So the bed is sort of slightly angled as you look out. And then there is a residence lounge that forms half of the footprint of level 20, the rest of which is devoted to plant rooms for pressure breaks for all of the risers as you run through the building itself. And the residence lounge is then available for all of the residents to use and serviced by the hotel. The residences are designed by MSMR, and one of the features associated with the residences is this glass corner that we have on a number of on 3 corners of the building that was sort of quite important to us, really. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about the facade. So, the facades are quite complex, as you can imagine, for a 43-story tower. They're built up of a whole sort of series of layers, and we really wanted to do something quite special with the corners to try and minimize the impact of structure in the corner of the hotel rooms and the residences. So you'll see that there's a hanging system that exists on the outside of the building that is actually structural, that's holding the floor plate up, that allows these triangular corners to come to a point without any structure. So all you get is a glass-to-glass bond for those corner units. The facade, when it's sort of unwrapped, is quite complex. There's actually a difference in floor-to-floor height between the hotel element and the residential element. And we actually have 33 different facade types. So quite a feat for poor old Lisa, who were the trade contractor. The facade is quite difficult. It sort of consists of a series of horizontal louvers that sit on the outside of a curtain wall system, a spandrel panel that reads into the corners, and then this very sort of glass element. So you build up a series of layers of the glass and the corners behind, the hangers associated with it, the curtain walling, and then the louvers that sit in front of the central element. And below you have these 5 columns that sort of mark the lower public floors of the building. And on each facade, you actually have a canopy, some of which are at different height. The main canopy in front of the plaza sits above the hotel, the swimming pool floor. The entrance canopy sits a little bit lower. So here you can see the relationship between the external brise soleil, the fact that there is vision glass sort of through that, but a very high performance facade as well. And on the residential floors, you actually have opening windows associated with that facade as well. Here you can see the relationship of the canopy back to the exposed concrete columns, and the whole frame is concrete. The hanging system was very difficult. It was something that was enshrined within the design because of this idea of having glass-to-glass corners. But you have a stainless steel hanger that connects back to a concrete column. There is an outrigger that then allows you to pick up the slab associated with the corner. And the corner was actually cast separately to the main post-tension slab. So there was a very, very difficult sequence associated with the construction of these elements. And you know, thermally, performance-wise, it was quite a complicated thing to do, but we, you know, it was a major part of the design. But it does allow you to have these amazing views through this sort of 45-degree angle that aren't encumbered by an interior structure. All you see is this intricate sort of nature of the cast hangers and the nodes associated with them. So, and here is just a sort of few more details and some construction shots just showing how all of that came together. Years of discussion with lots of members of the team. The coloration of the building is, there are 2 different sort of shades of anodized bronze aluminium. on the building itself to interplay the colour, and really we were sort of trying to pick up on the coloration of the conservation areas, a lot of brick, as I said, in the area, and a lot of bath stone. So you know, moving away really consciously from the stainless steel of Heron Tower and the sort of, you know, normal sort of aluminium that I think you get in some of the other buildings on Bishopsgate. The setback floors allow us to incorporate a series of sort of biodiverse green roofs. So level 42 to 44, we have green roofs, and level 34 incorporates some green roofs, and there's some planting associated with the plaza. So 38 native wildflowers and 10 sort of sedum species as well at the upper levels. And then level 34 incorporates sort of 42 native wildflower species as well to try and encourage biodiversity. So when it sort of comes to the whole energy sort of performance of the building, you have the water source heat pumps for heating and hot water generation, and we were very tightly controlled in respect of water consumption. Very, very high levels of insulation with the building, and trying to sort of maximize daylight into the space as well. You have the biodiversity associated with the green roofs, the plaza planting, and the incorporation of bird and bat boxes. And then just in the whole sort of environmental life cycle analysis, a lot of time spent on material selection, making sure the facade design was efficient as it possibly could be, and you know, looking at materials durability and construction waste management. So we're BREEAM excellent for the tower, we're BREEAM excellent for Devonshire Row, and though it's no longer really current, we because of when the building was designed, we're Code for Sustainable Homes level 3. Just moving on briefly to the building on Devonshire Row. Devonshire Row has some office space associated with it, some retail space. It also has a little bit of back of house space for the hotel. It's really, it was enormous amounts of hard work, Devonshire Row. It's like archaeology, architectural archaeology, really. The building that fronts Bishopsgate used to have a full facade associated with it. It was demolished. The southern element was demolished in order to allow for the building to be refurbished. And then that part had to be rebuilt and extended round onto the new plaza. And then there's this sort of new roof that sits above the whole building. The facades themselves have all sorts of different treatments. So some of it was restored, some of it was incorporated, a listed facade that had to be relocated. We had to build a new spine wall to the back of the building without doing too much damage to the tunnels. And here you can see in section the relationship of the running tunnels to the building itself. So a constantly monitored process to ensure that we weren't doing anything to damage the tunnel itself. The spine wall then had to incorporate some elements that remained in place and some that were sort of newly built. Enormously difficult task to do, very, very challenging for engineers and for contractors. The facade on Devonshire Row is actually sort of quite a pretty facade. It's really built like a series of Victorian terraced houses, but it had bath stone associated with the corner building, and then brick elements elsewhere, some of which were in quite poor shape. We did analysis to understand exactly what quarry the bath stone came from, and we were able to sort of get new bath stone to completely and utterly match what had been built previously, and to carry out refurbishment works to that stone. So Zerelmis did a fantastic job in actually carrying out that work. And you can see here the idea of trying to unify all of the buildings on Devonshire Road to actually sort of give them this sort of overall appearance, not only through the roof at high level, but with the retail at lower level as well, and the incorporation of the original materials within the facade, so that you get the continuity from the existing facade to the new replica facade. The listed shop front, which I think is actually only dates back to the 1930s, but was listed by English Heritage prior to the demolition happening, was painstakingly restored by some chap who moved it into his shed in Lincolnshire and spent best part of 2 years actually going through this and renovating it. It has a beautiful copper roof that sits on top of it, but a real sort of labor of love. And then the roof itself that sits on top of the building, this sort of scale-like structure, is sort of free spanning, so that no columns associated with this roof. It will actually incorporate a restaurant use associated with it. And it's made up of a series of scalar-like cassettes that were subcontracted to Frainer and Reifer, who did an amazing job in understanding our geometry and working with the overall sort of pattern that we gave them. But it creates this amazing grid-like structure that is currently being used as a meeting room as they finish off the building, but I think will make a fabulous restaurant space. So in summary, I think One Bishopsgate Plaza is a truly mixed-use development for the city. I think it sort of creates this amazing new public space that fronts onto Bishopsgate. It gives the city what it needs, and there is this requirement for 5-star hotels and a ballroom that can be occupied by 400 people, and hopefully a new landmark for London. Thank you very much.
Mark, that was, let me just start my video. Yes. That was very, very comprehensive. And I had a number of questions written down before you started, and several of them you have answered already. But there's plenty more to be asked. I mean, one of them really goes back to this question of the long gestation. And you mentioned right at the end that the city requested various things, that there was a need for the hotel and a need for a ballroom. Did that actually come from the city rather than from the hotelier?
I think, the discussions with the city, I think originally, the conversations were all around commercial uses and office uses. Yeah. But I think it's sort of generally known that there is a requirement for more hotels, and I think that's an ongoing requirement for London itself. And I think the city, when negotiations sort of took place, always wanted the capability of having a ballroom. So the idea of the ballroom was very important to the city. When the designs were being developed with Four Seasons, the residential use was service residential, and it later became a private for sale residential with UOL. And I think there was always trying to get residential permissions in the city is not the easiest thing. But I think once it was understood that there was this sort of series of benefits associated with the scheme that gave a public space that incorporated a hotel, that you could start to see that there was a way of making this new use work for the site that wasn't really working when you took the commercial use into play, because of the size of the footprint. Does that answer your question? Maybe not.
Yes, well, it's interesting that it evolved in that way. Um, Let me just do a follow-up on the residential side, because I noticed that the residents enter through the hotel lobby rather than having their own doorway as they do in some American equivalents to this. And yet it's not a service department development. It's a for sale thing, but presumably that was seen as a plus, that they're coming into a 24-hour manned lobby.
I think it's. I think it's one of the planning conditions, actually, Richard. To be honest with you, so it was something that grew from the discussions with the city about the way the hotel use would sort of develop. I think it's positive because it adds to the life of the ground floor, and you want the ground floor to be as animated as possible. So having people pass through the same entrance, I think it is a really positive thing.
Yeah, well, it's certainly going to be unusual for the people who live there. They haven't got any car space, have they? I mean, that's literally excluded.
No, it was never incorporated. There's a lot of cycle spaces, so there is a basement that sort of sits below Devonshire Row that connects into the tower itself. So there's cycle spaces, but there's no car parking on site. No car parking whatsoever.
And I must say the biggest surprise to me was that the ballroom is under the plaza and not in that building at the front with the scaly roof. I was originally under the impression that's where the ballroom was going to be.
That's going to be a restaurant space. So there's two levels of restaurant that and kitchens that sort of sit within the rest of the arm on Devonshire Road.
Okay.
As well as some plant space in there too.
I've got a question here about the comfort of the plaza. The huge problems that the walkie-talkie has created, and we've got two towers quite close to each other, which probably creates an acceleration between the two towers. What did you do to manage the comfort of the plaza?
Yeah, there's a lot of work that's been done, with wind engineers to try and understand the interplay of our building, of Heron Tower, and actually, whenever because of the long gestation period with the building, as 100 Bishopsgate sort of came into play, and even 22, we had to take those into account as well. So there's a lot of modelling that's been done, even to the extent that before we had the ballroom entrance, the glass pavilion, there was actually a water feature in that location, and even that had to be sort of tested and modelled. So the canopy that sits on the western side of the building has a positioning associated with it that prevents downdraft from the westerly winds that hit the tower itself. There's an entrance, there's a space between Devonshire Row and the base of the tower that sort of fronts onto the bar space. And again, that has some wind mitigation measures. So there are some screens in that location and some planting in that location as well. So the whole area has been quite extensively modelled and reviewed a number of times with the modellers and with the city, to ensure that the locations are appropriate for the uses that should be taking place there.
It's still an inexact science, though, isn't it? I mean, you don't know till it blows.
that is very true, Richard. I think it is an inexact science, and I think we all know that there are areas where on a windy day it's not an appropriate place to be. I really hope that with all of the modelling that we've carried out, the areas are going to be suitable for the uses proposed.
And I imagine that, you know, if things go on like they are right now, that somebody will want to do outdoor dining in that plaza.
Absolutely. So, you know, the space itself, whilst it's a public space, it's actually within the ownership of the hotel. They are proposing to carry out, you know, a series of events within that space, both public events and, you know, there's a small area that associated with the area below the canopy that they will probably use for outdoor dining associated with the lobby bar as well. So, you know, I think the idea of having, you know, a curated space that, you know, is functional, that's not just used for seating, you know, but has, I don't know, you know, food markets associated with it, or cinema events or something along those lines, you know, could be very exciting.
Oh yeah, oh yes, and fortunately it faces west, doesn't it? So
It does
it's sort
face
of
west, yeah. That's
end
right.
of the day is probably its best lighting.
Yeah, and you know, as it's starting to come together now, it's actually a fantastic space to be. I was there, you know, a couple of days ago, and it's really very nice, and all of the seating is starting to come together, and you know, the seating is all part of PAS rated security systems for anti-vehicle measures. So you know, it has to fulfill a number of different things as a public space.
Okay, got an interesting question here from Barnaby Collins, the planner. What would you have done differently if you hadn't had to keep the Devonshire Row block?
Oof. Thanks, Barnaby. Do you know, I think keeping the Devonshire Row block was really essential to the scheme. Actually, I don't think it would have helped in any way with a commercial building, because you have the issue of the district line that sits below the building itself. So you would always have been tied to a certain extent as to what you could do with that part of the site. Plus, you've got the frontage onto Devonshire Row. So, you know, trying to make a transition between Devonshire Row, a 4 or 5 story building, and then a 43 story tower is always going to be a bit of a challenge. And what's quite nice is, you know, that you work with that existing piece of architecture, you create it, you give it a new lease of life, you create a new sort of southern wall and a new roof, and that immediately allows you to sort of form that transition. So, you know, I don't think it was ever really on the cards that, you know, we were going to sort of remove the Devonshire Row building. So I hope I've dodged that question from Barnaby.
But you've obviously created another situation where you've got a huge scale change between the rinky-dink 19th century and the 21st. Now, either you say that's modern London, contrast is everything, or else you say, I hope you don't notice it.
Well, I think we've got all of that going on, to be honest with you, Richard, because you know, we work very, very hard on the Bishopsgate frontage of the Devonshire Row building as it sort of turns the corner to understand exactly what material that was made from to start with, because I don't think anybody really, it had been painted so many times, I don't think anybody really knew that it was Bath stone. So once we uncovered that, we did quite a bit of analysis to understand the Bath stone, and then to try and ensure that where we were recreating, you know, with the new facade next to the old facade, we actually we knew that the stone was in such a poor condition that we were going to have to paint the existing stone. So the existing Bath stone is painted. The new Bath stone is just pure new Bath stone. So to try and get the two to match was very, very tricky. And we worked with paint manufacturer Kayam to, you know, really go through a series to see whether or not we could get them to match completely and utterly. So you have one element where you're trying to blend in with the existing. The south facade, we were unapologetic. We just said, you know, look, this is a new facade. We want to we want to use brick because brick is used within that area. It's on the north face of the Devonshire Row buildings, and it sits throughout sort of Devonshire Square as well. But we wanted to use it in a, there's London stock bricks sort of as part of that, but a mixture of London stock bricks and some pinks in there as well. And then, new windows, because the south facade, was brand new. On the north side, all of the Victorian windows they're new, but they are exactly the same as the original windows that were in the buildings. They're just double glazed in order to get the performance that's required.
Well, you've explained a building which is immensely ambitious in materials, in detailing, in spatial qualities of one kind or another. Are you able to tell us what it cost, or is that something you're not allowed to talk about?
I don't think I am allowed to say that, Richard. Sorry.
But presumably, it was all calculated on the basis that it was worth doing at that spec level.
Yeah, I think UOL had massive ambitions to open a hotel in Western Europe, and I think they looked long and hard at a number of different sites in London, and had either sort of found them not really suitable, or they didn't complete on the purchases, or somebody else bought the site. So I think when there was a very sort of personal relationship that I think formed between the Yu family and Gerald Ronson at Heron when Gerald had to sell the site. So I think there was a real drive from them that was very exciting, because it was a building that already had planning permission as a sort of Four Seasons hotel brief, and then they came along with their own hotel brief, but they really respected the original consent and the ambitions that there were within the site itself, and really immediately sort of understood the constraints associated with the site and what it meant to develop a hotel and residential building there. Yeah,
including crazy challenges like digging right down to the tubes.
Yeah, I mean, it really
on
was.
top of Crossrail.
Yeah, no, it's well, with Crossrail going on, you're at some point we were actually exposing the crown of the District Line tunnel. So, and there's an umbilical cord that links Devonshire Row with the tower at that basement level, both for people and for services, and that connectivity between the two, and just even trying to get the levels to work, is very, very complex, very difficult.
I mean, would you say that was the biggest challenge of the whole project, or was it something else?
I think a number of challenges. The trying to get the massing right and the placement of the building, but it's like a jigsaw, and my involvement with this project goes sort of back to probably about 2011, 2012, something like that. So there were people sort of working on it before then, but I think that the real, if you take a site as a challenge, the one thing that unlocks it is, or that unlocks this site, is the use. And it's really having that smaller footprint of a hotel and residential building that then, suddenly allows you to have something that's taller, that gives you the public space, that utilizes the buildings that make a positive contribution to the conservation area, and that keep the existing infrastructure working. There wasn't a single interruption in the District Line, that we incorporated when building it.
Yeah, my goodness. Well, I think I'm going to end with a non-technical question. High praise from Ruth Ward here. Fascinating lecture, amazing building. When should we be booking for dinner? In other words, when's it going to be finished?
Yeah, I think you know, I think they're really desperate to finish it, and it's very close to being finished. I think opening, my understanding is Q2 2021, so not too far away. I don't know exactly when that will be, but you know, we have to finish the construction first of all, which is very soon, and then there's a little bit that the hotel have to do. So I would have thought towards the end of Q2 2021.
Right. Well, bookings are no doubt being considered already for the gala opening once anything can open. As you know, there's several splendid hotels going up in London, or almost going up. It's going to be quite a battle, isn't it, with Grosvenor Square and the Marble Arch one, not Marble Arch, the Admiralty Arch one.
Yeah.
And these are Asian operators for the most part. So I think the battle will be joined.
Absolutely.
We shall have to work our way around them and rate them all. I think you've spent the last 15 years very well, Mark. I hope they appreciate it, and thank you for giving us such a riveting lecture.
Thank you very much, Richard.